Hey Ubers, welcome to Gratitude Friday, episode 3. Today I'm going to teach you how to create a natural granite effect using an egg carton made out of cardboard. So we're going to be upcycling and preventing waste from going into the landfill, so I'm very excited about that. I've been thinking about you guys all week. This is the only video I'm putting out this week, but I really wanted to just provide you with a technique video that's original so that I don't waste your time. And it also challenges me to think outside of the box and bring you guys something absolutely original and something you might want to use for your various projects. It doesn't have to be for cards. Anyway, so I'm ripping the piece of the egg carton. I'm ripping the egg carton into variegated pieces, and I'm bending it out of shape. I'm creating tears in it so that I can create a nice veiny effect ultimately. If you don't like any of the text showing, you can rip out pieces that don't include any text. Or you can just rip off the very, very top layer of the cardboard because it's got several layers of cardboard in there. One thing that I'd like to say about this is, I am upcycling. I'm preventing, matter from going into land waste by using this egg carton. You could also use those inner pieces, because those are flat. If you didn't want to use this cardboard, you could also use rice paper. But keep in mind, rice paper is much more transparent, and you're going to need to be aware of the surface that you're going to glue it onto. So I'm going to paint these with my watercolors. I like this watercolor palette because I can arrange my colors the way the color wheel is arranged and mute colors by using their complements and so on and so forth. So I'm using a magenta, purple, and a muted green. It's a hooker's green. And I saturated this piece with a little bit of water first, I don't know if you noticed, and then I'm using more concentrated amounts of the magenta and putting that in the crevices and tears, the deeper ones, to create a veined effect. Now if you find that there's an area that is a little too dark, you can just easily lap that up with a piece of paper towel. You want to create lights and darks on each piece. The nice thing about this cardboard is that it doesn't absorb your paint too quickly. So if you decide several seconds later that it's too dark, you can easily just pick up the color with your paper towel. And because it is this material that holds eggs, it's very lightweight. So you'd think that something like this would make your card too heavy, but actually in the end, it turns out that the card is just as lightweight as any other card you'd make. Now on this piece that I just did, I didn't saturate it first. So it's more of a dry brush type of technique, and you can see the difference in the effect. It's a lot more rough. And then on that piece that I just finished on the right, I just did a real light coat of a very diluted magenta. Okay, so now I'm going in with my purple. And so I'm using some pretty high quality watercolors. I would think that, a basic set that you could get from a hobby store would work just as well. We're not creating, a work of art here. Well, I guess that just depends on how you look at it. But I am a watercolorist, so I have some nice watercolors, and I'm really trying to hold off on buying a couple of more colors that I'd really like to have. I'm trying to get back into my watercoloring. This project helped me pull out that palette and start using it, so I'm really excited about that. So you can see that the one that I used the dry brush technique on has a lot more of a rough, bold effect. Now, I love watercolor because of these accidents that happen and because of the way the watercolors just blend on the surface in a really organic, natural way. It's kind of psychedelic, actually, the way it happens, if you just sit there and watch as the colors blend together. If you don't want that type of blending to happen, you can experiment with applying one color and letting it completely dry and then applying another color, and then you won't have that blending that goes on. It all depends on what you're going for. So here's that Hooker's green, and I wanted to include this color because it really, for me, brings me back to hikes that I've gone on in Hawaii, and because there's just so much humidity, there's just life growing on the rock formations, and I wanted to recreate that sense of green and moss. So these are done, and also, okay, these are dry now. And I don't know if you noticed, but I skipped forward to when these pieces had dried. And the paint always dries a couple of shades lighter. So this is a really nice subtle effect on this one. And I can see that could make a very beautiful card. And that one's quite dark. But it looks like granite. So there's that writing. You know, if you really don't like that and you accidentally put that in there, you can sand it off. You can put some gesso down or some white acrylic paint before you start watercoloring. But that's going to affect the way the watercolors absorb into your paper. So I'm using this set by Inkadinkado. It's called Mindscapes, and here in Las Vegas, spring is coming. Spring is kind of here already, and it's February. And, you know, this is Gratitude Friday, and I've been poking around in the garden, and, you know, the garden is just so inspiring to me. I'm using Memento Rich Cocoa just to show you what these stamps look like. This is the type of stamp set I adore, because there's so much detail in each image, and they're just gorgeous. So you know, pop that stamp on your acrylic block, tamp it on the ink pad, and in a matter of moments, you have a beautiful image for your card or whatever project you're working on. So this is one of my favorites, and so I've been in the garden, oops, and my rose bush was being attacked by aphids, and I'm really making a concerted effort not to use any type of pesticide in my garden. Here's a hummingbird. And because, you know, my doggies are out there and they're munching on greens out there all the time, and, you know, there's stuff in that garden that I'm going to eat. And anyway, so I picked up some ladybugs, and I put them on my rose bush and covered up the rose bush with a bag just so that they wouldn't fly away immediately. And they have not gone. I took off the bag the next day, and they have not gone anywhere. They're eating up all the aphids, and they're just my best friend. So look at all that detail. It's just gorgeous. So this ladybug is one of my favorite stamps of all the stamps that I own. I've done a couple of other cards with it, using like gold embossing powder, and it creates a nice vintage look. Okay, I ended up not using that strip, but I used my Cuttlebug dies to cut these out. I'm not quite decided on which one I'm going to use, but I cut them out off-center using my die cut machine and that Cuttlebug die. And here I'm just showing you how I could distress the edges. I used a walnut stain. I've used these Cuttlebug dies in the past when I choose to age the edges a bit, because I really am pleased with how the ink takes to the edge. So I'm using them again, and I very intentionally set those images off-center. I think it's more interesting that way. So here's a Krusty's box that I used to make my turkey chili and cornbread last night. And I'm upcycling this too. I'm going to cut out a piece that's 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches. And this is what I'm going to adhere all my pieces to. I just want to show you, I did some other experimented with some other colors. These are more earthy. So these are like umbers, ochres, hooker green again, some cad red, some cad yellow, cad orange, and that could be for another card. Here's just that one color, magenta, at with different levels of dilution, and I'm going to use that to fill in some spaces on this card. So I'm using a foam brush and my beloved Mod Podge to adhere these variegated strips to this base. So I'm a big fan of never buying chipboard because there's so many things that we use, that we buy for our kitchens that we can use. So stupid me, when I first started card making, I actually bought chipboard. But there are different thicknesses of chipboard, and I bought chipboard that's a little bit thicker than cereal box weight. But as of this moment, I'm not really doing that many scrapbooking albums that use that type of thing. So they're just sitting in the cupboard. But I think for most card makers, the cereal weight chipboard is just fine. And we all, I think, pretty much all of us eat cereal. There's also corrugate that we get from boxes of food items that we get from Costco. And I break those down and save those also because I know I'm going to be able to use those for another project in the future. So I'm sort of taking the variegated edges and seeing if they'll sort of fit into the edges of the pieces that I've already adhered, and it sort of helps the whole piece hold together. And I'm not going to show you all of this, but you get the idea. I'm very liberally applying the Mod Podge, just so it gets into all the nooks and crannies. And you also want to make sure at the very start of your project, when you're ripping out these pieces, that you bend them up quite a bit so you break down the fibers and so that they'll sit down flat. So here I am at the end. Actually stuck a little tack in at one point because the ripped edge was sort of flaying upwards, and you might like that, but I didn't want that for this project. And then because this stuff is pretty thick, you want to set it aside to dry for quite a while. I used my scissors to cut off the edges once it was dry, and now I'm just sanding off the edges to make a nice, clean, straight edge. And I also want to create sort of a worn feeling. So this is a medium weight piece of sandpaper, and I'm rubbing it along the corners too so you can see that some of the fibers beneath the paint. So I think this definitely has a feeling of rock. And the color choices that I used for this project also make me feel like it could be flower petals. I don't know if you have heard of this artist. His name is Andy Goldsworthy. I remember when I first moved to LA, I temped at an architectural firm, and I came across a couple of his books, and he does the most amazing artwork, just using things that he finds in his walks in nature. And he'll take like these huge boulders and cover them in rose petals. And this kind of gives me the same feeling. So it definitely looks like natural rock. Okay, so because the edges of that piece are very straight, and that was intentional, I want to use these pieces of tissue paper that came with a gift someone gave me. I ripped them up into rectangular pieces. I want those to be rough-edged to provide a little bit of a contrast in shape. So I'm just going to layer those pieces in the very center. And I'm using my Scotch ATG to adhere them together. And once they're all down, I'm going to fold some of the edges to create a little bit more interest, just sort of randomly. And I thought this, because this is all very natural looking, this white shiny ribbon would be a nice contrast. So I'm going to wrap that around 3 times to get an idea of where I need to cut it. And I'm going to put some snail at the very end. But before I do that, like I said, I'm folding these edges in random places to create some more interest. Oh, and while I'm on the subject of different textures and this shiny ribbon, I wanted to say you could also do this. I think I mentioned earlier with rice paper. If you go to an art supply store, you can find all different types of rice paper with different levels of fiber thickness and swirls of fibers, and they're much thinner than this cardboard, but then you're not upcycling, so it's a little trade-off. And if you do use those papers, you can use, and you don't want a shiny effect, you could use matte medium to adhere those pieces. This is a piece, a 2-inch square of cardstock from Paper Tray ink. The color is called Ripe Olive, and I love this color. I'm using it a lot. And I'm distressing the edges with a tool from Tim Holtz. This cardstock is fabulous. I'm going to be using it for a lot of my card bases because it's just very thick. So this Ripe Olive matched very nicely with the Tim Holtz Distress ink in peeled paint. Ultimately, that's the color I used to stamp the ladybug focal image. And I also distressed the edges using my sponge applicator and the same ink, peeled paint. I just picked that up at Michael's, I believe. It was on sale for 40% off, and I want to accumulate all of his distress inks. I was in a little bit of a rush, so I had put some glossy accents on the top of the piece of cardstock, and this cardstock is also from Paper Tray ink, and it was their white, their pure white color. It's very thick, and the cardstock doesn't warp because of the glossy accents used. So I popped that up onto dimensionals. And that's our focal image. I'm going to use glue dots because it's very strong adhesive in the 4 corners. And this faux granite effect that piece is somewhat thick, so I just wanted to use something that would not come off. So this card honors the diminutive ladybug, the diligent worker in my garden, who I hope will stick around through the spring and summer months. I don't know about you guys, but this spring, earlier in February, I told myself I wasn't going to get obsessed in the garden. But it just makes me so happy to be out there. I don't know how it is for you. The garden provides me with so much inspiration and joie de vivre. If you've ever struggled with depression and you've got a garden or a plot, just get out there and start digging in the ground. Start some easy seeds, because it is just such a cure for the blues. This is the time of year where all the gardening catalogs are arriving, and yes, I told myself I wasn't going to invest in any more plants, seedlings, or seeds, but I think this year I'm going to try some beautiful white hollyhocks. I'm going to stick to tones, cool tones, to sort of help me feel cool despite a very, very hot Las Vegas summer. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already. And you can come visit me on my blog. I will provide a complete list of materials for this card on my blog. And I hope this card inspires you to get crafting, to try to think of new ways to use things you would normally throw in the trash. I always keep an eye out for things with interesting textures. And I hope it also inspires you to get in your yard and start planting some beautiful produce or flowers. You'd be amazed at how easy it is to grow stuff that you can harvest for the vase or for your plate. Even if it's just a balcony, you can have a container garden growing on your balcony as well. So anyway, I'm so thankful that you've watched, and I hope I've inspired you. Check back again next week, and until then, happy crafting, happy gardening, and please comment and let me know what you're up to. Thanks. Bye.